Oh, hello. My name is Caleb Denby, and welcome back to Game Review. Today, we're going to be going over a game from the Tata Steel Masters tournament that's going on right now. And this one is between one of America's up-and-coming superstar chess players, Jeffery Xiong and Jorden von Foreest. Jeffery managed to win this game, and let's see how he did it. It was actually a very interesting one. The game started e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and bishop b5 check. So of course, bishop b5 is one of the most popular lines for white against the Sicilian these days. And the reason for that is this bishop often ends up looking a little bit, looking a little bit out of place. It's difficult to find a home for this bishop sometimes. And so quite often, the white players, as in this game, will trade it off early using this bishop b5. And that's exactly what happens here. And now, Jeffery plays this move, c4, kind of committing to a Machuca bind style of position. And we'll see very, very quickly that he arrives at just that without too much hassle. Knight f6, knight c3, g6, and now after d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop g7. You can really see the structure has started to take shape. So of course, you can imagine if a bishop were still on the f1 square here, it wouldn't be the happiest piece. It'd be stuck behind this c-pawn and this e-pawn, and eventually maybe, after white's next move, f3, it would not even have this open diagonal to its name. So it makes a lot of sense for white to get rid of this bishop early on in this opening. Black continues by castling. White plays bishop e3, knight c6, castles, queen d3, rook fc8, and b3. And this is all pretty well-known territory. This is nothing new so far. But Black's next move is actually a very ambitious attempt to solve all of Black's problems at once here. Just talking a little bit about the general structure of Machuca bind positions, we're really focusing in on this d5 square. This is the point of White's play. He wants to prevent Black from ever playing this move, d5. And meanwhile, from the Black point of view, Black does have quite a bit less space, but he has pretty much two freeing moves. If he can ever play d5, he's really, really happy, and all of his problems will be solved. But in order to achieve that, he really needs to loosen White's grip on this square. And that's generally done with the move that Black played in the game, b5. Now, of course, this move looks a little bit strange. It looks as though Black is simply sacrificing a pawn here, and in some sense he is, but it's not as simple as it might seem. Historically, I want to mention the move queen d8 has seen some play. There's a Topalov game as well as a Maxim Vashirlogrov game with this move. And the reason for queen d8 is mostly to vacate this square, so knight d7 and knight c5 can come through. And the game would continue, but Black really would still have these spatial problems. And eventually Black is going to try to play this move b5. So if b5 works here for Black, it's actually very theoretically important, because now this would mean that Black can solve all of his problems immediately without any hassle. He's playing all of the breaks he needs. But unfortunately for him, Jeffery managed to actually cause some problems. Jeffery did capture this pawn. Now knight e5 was Jordan's choice, queen d2, keeping an eye on this knight, and now d5. And so we see Black, like I said, is trying to solve all of his problems at once, play all of the pawn breaks as soon as he can. Knight takes d5 is Jeffery's move. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, and now Black does recapture this pawn on b5. And if we do take quick stock of the pawns, it's actually 6-5 in White's favor. White, for the moment, has this extra d pawn. But the question is going to be if he can really keep this pawn. And it's actually a pretty interesting question. Jeffery plays the move rook ad1, which is a very tricky move, actually. It seems as though, at first, Black can really capture this pawn without any hassle. Just queen takes d5. But here, Jeffery actually has a very important move to maintain an advantage. And I won't ask you to find it at home because it's actually a very, very difficult move. It's simply queen e2. And while you might, think this move is very, very natural, the point behind it is pretty subtle, right? First of all, we're attacking this pawn. But the deeper point is if b4, the very natural choice to keep this pawn defended, we're going to play knight f5 and pick up the very important dark squared bishop. And once this bishop falls off the board, black is actually going to be in a little bit of danger again. You can imagine queen e6, knight takes bishop, king takes bishop, bishop d4, and these dark squares are actually looking pretty weak. You have to play f6, and now things like f4 are going to come, things like rook e1, there's going to be pressure on this e-pawn, and it would be very, very uncomfortable for black. So all of that is to say, rook a d1, a very tricky move, delaying black's ability to recapture this pawn. The game continued with b4, and now Jeffery plays queen e2 anyways. Perhaps slightly better might have been the move knight e2. Now, no need for all these tricks. White's just going to try to keep the pawn. But queen e2, not a bad move. And rook c3 was black's choice. And this move is actually a bit of a mistake. Of course, if black were to capture here, he would transpose into the previous line. But he can actually solve this problem of knight f5 relatively easily, simply by moving this bishop off of g7. Now, with the bishop on f6, black would want to recapture here and be totally fine. Instead, though, rook c3, bishop f2, and now bishop f6. But now we really see a key difference between the first line and this line. And that difference is that this rook has been put onto a pretty bad square, actually. c3 is not where it wants to be. And because this rook is on c3, we can play knight b5 and hit this rook with tempo. So this rook has to move, and now Jeffery has the time to play a very annoying move, d6. d6, trying to trade this pawn off for the pawn on e7 and solidify white's advantage of having the extra pawn. But we'll see in the game, it's not quite so simple. Rook a b8 does attack the knight has to move, the knight comes to c7, and now black does get the pawn back, but in return, white's pieces have been greatly improved. This knight is on an excellent outpost on d5. This pawn is going to be forever weak on d6. In fact, black might rather not have this pawn at all, just to free up his pieces a little bit. There's serious dark squared weaknesses around this king, and Jeffery is going to be doing very, very well in this position. Black played bishop d8, and now it's actually a relatively easy game for white to win here. And it's a little bit shocking that Jeffery didn't play the simplest plans and instead really gave his opponent an opportunity to get back into the game. Jeffery's choice was f4, but much simpler is to just play rook d4, double rooks on the d file, and the fact of the matter is all of these pawns are going to fall for black. There's just no good way to defend all of these weaknesses. For example, you can try to defend with queen b7. White is in no rush, though, to do anything. You can simply play a move like knight e3. You're hitting this pawn. This pawn is forever weak as well, and white's just going to be much, much better. Instead, though, this move f4 gives black an opportunity to come back into the game by playing knight g4. Now, this bishop is a little bit uncomfortable. It's a very, very powerful piece, and you definitely don't want to trade it for the knight. So bishop d4 is forced. And now after rook b5, this knight is actually slightly uncomfortable. You have to defend it with queen f3. You can also defend it by making a retreating move, but queen f3 is the most natural. Now queen f5, though, adds another attacker to the knight. Rook e1, Jeffery chooses to defend it tactically. Of course, this threatens a checkmate. Bishop h4 is black's choice. And now, after bishop b2, black is actually equalizing if he plays accurately here. The move queen c2 is actually what he needs to be doing, putting more pressure along this second rank. There's no good way to evict this queen due to the awkward placement of white's rooks, and really, white has nothing better than to play knight e7 and trade off this star knight for this knight on g4, and then all pieces are hanging, and you can imagine after queen b2, well, that hangs a rook, so don't do that. After something like rook a8, rook e7, queen b2, pieces are starting to be liquidated, and this game is going to fizzle out. Black, however, missed this opportunity. Once again, queen c2 is the move he had to play, looking for counterplay, and he chose to give a check, as we all are sometimes tempted to do. And after king h1, his last chance to get back into the game is to solve the problem of this fork by playing king f8. And this looks pretty counterintuitive, because you're allowing white to capture this rook, and the line is kind of long and tactical, and tough for a human to play, I think. But black's choice, bishop h4, actually loses immediately, and I'll let you at home try and find the move to prove it for just a moment here. Go ahead and pause the video if you like. But, okay, the answer is pawn to g3. And the fact is, this bishop has no squares. g5 is obviously attacked. f6 runs into bishop takes f6, when if you recapture this, I'll have a very nice fork. And bishop e7 loses to obvious reasons, and bishop d8 actually allows checkmate in 1. So this bishop is completely trapped on the h4 square, and that is the end of the game for black. A few more moves were played. Knight f2 check, white simply captures. Rook takes d5 was black's idea, getting the knight on d5 for this knight on f2, but now white can simply capture the bishop and be up a clean piece. A few more moves were played, and after rook c1 here, black simply resigned. So actually a very impressive game from Jeffery here, using this d-pawn to his advantage to play moves like d6 and get his pieces active. Black missed an opportunity to come back into the game, and then Jeffery winning a piece tactically, and it's all over. Thank you very much for joining me today on Game Review, and I'll see you in the next episode.